Hey everybody, welcome to season 2 of the Building Thinkers podcast. I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the plans for the season first. We're going to explore in each episode one of my 12 favorite problems. You can think about these 12 favorite problems as my constant curiosities, my life's work, the projects I tend to work on, the people I tend to collaborate with, and the through line of the things I'm interested in. And I want to go deep on these 12 favorite problems. I've written them out as a series of questions, and I want to talk to others who share these same questions, these same curiosities, who've been working in these spaces, and I want to know what they've learned, the things that they're thinking about as the if only people knew statements when it comes to this problem, to this curiosity. And so, if any or all of these 12 favorite problems are of interest to you, they'll be in the title of each episode, and then we'll explore them with different lenses and perspectives and experiences of those who share these 12 favorite problems. I'm so excited to kick off season 2 of the Building Thinkers podcast with this powerful episode. I talked with Sandhya Sudhakar, and we had a wonderful conversation all around the question, how might we help activate human potential? Sandhya shares how her keen awareness of what was expected of her led her to consistently deliver on those expectations for years, earning a scholarship to business school, joining a Fortune 50 company, and climbing the corporate ladder, checking the boxes of traditional success along the way. That is, until she looked around and asked herself the question, is this what I actually want? Sandhya's journey of recovery from burnout and reconnection with herself helped her to see the better we know ourselves and what truly motivates us, the easier it is to succeed in our careers without all the struggle and sacrifice. Now, as the founder of Self at Work, she helps teams and their leaders be themselves at work and experience the wild success that follows. All right, welcome to the Building Thinkers podcast. Today, I'm so delighted to be joined by
Sandhya Sudhakar.
Oh, I'm so excited about our conversation today. We are going to dig into all things knowing yourself at work. And really, we're going to look at the question, how might we activate human potential? And so, Sandhya, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about this topic.
All right, we're going to go right at it. And I would love to hear a little bit of your story. What brought you to the things that you are building today? Any way you want to get there. What is it that you build and some of that journey?
Yeah. So I spent about 16 years in the corporate world. 13 years of that was at one major corporation. And then I kind of left to do some other things, try some other industries, do something a little more entrepreneurial, maybe a little less corporate and structured. But at the end of the day, the very short version of this story is somebody who was very socially intelligent and understood what people expected from her whole life. And in going to business school and getting a job that looks great on my resume and all of these things, it's like kind of checking these boxes off of the list of what success looks like, and not really at very many points stopping to ask myself, do I really want this? Like, I'm checking these boxes, but like, is this even my list to check off? And so where I landed was, this was fall of 2019. I found myself really just kind of the things in my life outside of work were affecting me a lot emotionally, more so than they ever had in my life. And at work, I was so checked out, and I was really disillusioned, and I just didn't have a lot of connection with the people that I was working with. And I didn't like the way that the company I was at was doing business. And I ended up there through an acquisition. And so it wasn't a choice that I made to join this company. And I found myself just feeling really gray and dull and blah, and like, this is not who I am. I didn't want to do things outside of work. And so long story short, I quit my job. I, left it all behind, and I ran away to, fly around the world and go on a sabbatical. And the cool thing that happened while I was traveling was that I met a lot of people who were able to reflect back to me what they saw in me. What they saw is like things that I did really well that I didn't even know other people couldn't do well, or that I didn't really recognize as something that was really valuable. And that experience was like really that very first kind of seed of the business I now have, which is really helping people understand the potential that they innately have and lean into who they are and how they naturally show up and the talents that they bring to the table at work and outside of work to really kind of own like who they are so that they can be themselves at work, but also recognizing when the place that they are working or the people that they are working with are not a good fit. And so at the end of the day, what I really love to do is just like help people remember who they are and what they're great at and make the choices that are best for them by knowing themselves really well.
So we're wrestling with this question of how might we activate human potential, and I'm hearing in that this piece of maybe it starts with knowing who you are, and it sounds like you heard some of that reflected from others that gave you a glimpse into things you couldn't see for yourself at that time. Where might you recommend people start if they're feeling some of the way that you just described?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that you can do. One is um what can you do for yourself? So really like we talk about understanding your values and what you care about, and I think a lot of people when they're writing down their list of values, and I do workshops and this type of stuff, right? And it's like they'll write down things like family or roles that they play for other people. And I understand your family is important to you and that's great, but like your values can't be things that you do for other people. They need to be about who you really are and who are you outside of all of those other things. And so I think taking some time to really reflect on that. There are many different books, there are journals, there are, frameworks like the Enneagram, which we inevitably, I'm sure, will kind of get into to explore this topic. And so I think all of those things are great. So choose your medium. What do you like to do? Do you like to listen to stuff? Do you like to write? Do you like to read? Just start wherever you naturally kind of feel more drawn. And then the other thing that I think is, it's what I shared in my story, and now it's kind of like a formal practice I have in my coaching business is gathering stories from the people who know you really well so that they can kind of reflect back to you, what do they see in you when you're at your best? And it's actually something that came from an exercise the University of Michigan, I think, started it, and it's called Reflected Best Self. And so it's just collecting these stories of at your best, like give me an example of when I was at my best, and you collect all these stories, you kind of like summarize the themes, and it becomes this exercise where it's like, oh, my talent is not uh being great at analyzing data. My talent is being able to bring in lots of inputs from different places by being really observant or by, merging these two skills. And so it becomes something more specific, maybe even less specific, but more applicable to life. So,
Yeah.
those are the two ways. Start either internally or start externally, but just start.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah, this idea of the others being able to see again the things that you can't necessarily see in yourselves, and they can maybe see part of the through line. And as you collect these stories, to your point, like specific but not, because the broader theme that comes up, and then when I've done things like this, I now can see both myself in new ways and what I'm offering my clients and what is my work to do and what is not my work to do, and understanding too, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do it. And so I would get asked for
Yeah.
certain things where I'm like, I can do that. And so some scarcity mindset from the past had me doing those things. But then I realized that's not what I really need to be doing. And I think there might have been some connection in there into some of the awareness. And that kind of brings me to a question that just from curiosity came up as you were speaking about what's at stake if we don't know ourselves at work and in connection to our potential?
That's a great question. I think one first kind of more obvious thing is burnout. Like, this is where burnout comes from. It's by
Mm-hmm.
draining ourselves, whether it's physically, mentally, emotionally, doing things that don't fill those buckets back up. Um, and so that's like a real implication, right? We can experience burnout in a physical health kind of way, where people experience things like adrenal fatigue and all of that, but we also, I think, maybe don't recognize as much, like, what does mental burnout look like, what does emotional burnout look like. And it's the disillusionment, the not caring, the not being in a place where you feel fulfilled by the work you do, or we start to doubt and question our capability because we're mentally drained, and we aren't as effective, and we're foggy, and we're less productive. But I think the real outcome of all of that, the real negative impact of all of that, is that, like, we're just not reaching our potential. I mean, and that was not a plan, but it is truly perfectly aligned with, when we're in those states, like, we're not doing the work that we're meant to do in the world, whether that's in work or like in our work, traditional work, or in the world, and the ways that we're meant to impact the people around us and the communities we live in.
Hmm. That's making me think about one step further into the mechanisms of this. And I want to just throw out something I'm thinking about. And so when you're in that moment of doing maybe the self work and recognizing that there's a misalignment, is part of it that when you do recognize that what you're doing is maybe you're not being your full self, but you're starting to uncover who that full self is part of that burnout happening because of that lack of alignment, that it's almost like we're maybe not pretending might be the wrong word, but we are acting in a way that no longer serves us, or we've kind of pulled back the layer and can see. I'm not sure if I'm getting to a real question here, but I'm wondering about the mechanism and like the
Yeah.
neuroscience of it. Is that part of what makes us tired? And one example I have of this is how on Zoom and even on this, how we like see ourselves, and it's weird to our brain that we see ourselves. And my understanding is that's part of Zoom fatigue, that your brain is like, what is happening here? And so it's almost like that,
Yeah.
but in the work world, where we like see ourselves, but we're like, is that really who I am when I take back all the facade of how I am showing up here in this workplace for this interaction? Is that a part of it? Is any of that a thing?
Yeah, I like the example of Zoom fatigue, right? Because it's this thing that we're just doing, right? We're going through the motions of this thing that is now so normalized, and yet our brain's working overtime just trying to keep up. And so if we think about burnout, or like, not being ourselves, right? Getting farther and farther away from ourselves. I like to think about it as like, we have these three buckets of physical, mental, and emotional energy. And when we're doing things in the ways that are not aligned with how we can best show up, we have a leak in the bucket, whether that's a little leak or a really big leak. So, what that might look like emotionally is doing work that is not aligned with your values, or that you don't feel some kind of connection, whether it's to the type of work that you're doing, to what the company's mission is, to the people that you're working with. When we lack connection, we don't get filled up emotionally. And so we also then can have experiences where it's like, I actually feel like this person doesn't get me, doesn't see me, right? That's a leaky bucket, because now I'm creating things and producing for this person that just doesn't see me. And so if we think about it in terms of buckets, it's like we have to stop the leaks, and we have to put good things in the bucket too. And so you could do that again in work, outside of work, but how do you keep that bucket full? And if you think about the way that we work in our workplaces, in corporate especially, there's kind of like one way of thinking. There's one way of solving problems. There's one way of communicating, where if you don't have an idea in a room right away in the meeting, you're maybe not seen as a leader. Or if you are a systemic thinker, but there's no pre-work or prep for a meeting, and so like you can't come up with whatever it is that you are capable of doing because you're being asked to work in a very particular way, that's where we then start to drain our bucket trying to come up with something and doubting ourselves. And so that then becomes a leak, right? It's like, oh, I'm not good at this. And it's like, no, you are good at this. Just in the way that you're being asked to do it, it's not working for you. And so that's like really the kind of crux of the work that I do with teams, is like helping people see what are the ways that you can thrive, what are the ways that you can best contribute, and how do we like design a team environment around those things instead of trying to fit every single person into the same box and then having them not produce as well, and contribute as much and also feel bad about themselves. So
Right.
I think I answered your question a little bit. But
no, 100%. Sandhya, now I'm imagining like in organizations, these like leaky buckets going around trying to like help each other, right? But like in the systems, but they're, draining, and it makes so much sense why there's these meetings sometimes that everybody is just trying to get to the other side of, and why there's so much missing efficiency, and to me, like joy and delight is missing in these opportunities because we're trying to keep going as leaky buckets forward, just the focus on the wrong things. Let's maybe talk about the distinction between the individual and the organizational, and how do you know when whatever's going on is something that you need to pause and do some internal work because maybe you're getting in your own way, there's something you need to wrestle with, and when do you know that it's something maybe systemic or structural within the organization, or to your point of even just the way of thinking that's expected in maybe a team doesn't serve the way that you come up with ideas, and there could be a structural change. Maybe more succinctly, when is it time to pause and do our work, and when is it time to make our voice heard and look at the system that we're in?
yeah, I would think about this as like a spectrum, because there's not necessarily one bucket or the other all the time. Now, there are some things that are firmly in one bucket or the other. So, as an example, something that is a purely systemic issue and it's not about you is anything that's associated with your identity, your gender, your race, your appearance, your, abilities. If there are people telling you that you lack potential because of any of those things, right away, systemic issue, right? Red flag, get out, run as fast as you can. But even things like, the Crown Act is, it's legislation that's been passed in the last, 5 years, and it's about ending hair discrimination at work, right? If you're being told you don't have executive potential because of the way that your hair naturally grows out of your head, not you. Like, not you, nothing you need to change. It's actually the environment you need to change. On the other end of the spectrum, if we have an environment that maybe we have a leader that like has great intentions and does want you to succeed, and yet you're not speaking up in meetings because you're in your head doubting yourself all the time or thinking my opinion doesn't matter, maybe there's a little bit more work that you get to do. I think it's like, is that environment welcoming to who you are? And there are some things that, for very real reasons, we have. This is part of why I love to study trauma in my free time, because it's like, at the end of the day, our bodies kind of hold us back from doing certain things because we've had strategies that work for us in the past. In our childhood, we've developed these coping mechanisms, and now we take those into environments where it is safe to do those things. It is safe to speak up or share your opinion, but your body's still holding you back, right? And so recognizing those types of things, like, is this something that you actually want to work on? Is this something that's aligned with who you are? If you envision who you want to be as a leader, is that still intrinsically part of you? And if it's not, then that can be a growth opportunity. It can be an area where you can work on developing your skill set or healing something or recognizing why you do that thing and being able to ask yourself, okay, is it safe to do this in this environment now? Yes. Like, let me start to do that more. Let me start to practice it more.
Sandhya, I love that. I'm wondering now about, let's put the frameworks to it. So talk to us a little bit about how you use the Enneagram, or wherever you want to start with the Enneagram. I'm not going to assume
Mhm.
I'm going to assume that most of our listeners generally know what the Enneagram is, but let's start at the beginning just in case. And
Yeah.
then I think there's a wide variety of the extent to which people recognize like how deep and far they can go with it. And so ready, go Enneagram.
So the Enneagram is known as a personality assessment. I really like to think about it as a framework for growth and development. And at the end of the day, what is most important about the Enneagram is that it's actually not about your behaviors. That's kind of the way that we go into it or find our type, but it's really about what's the core motivation behind what you do. Behind your greatest strengths, there's this motivation, whether it's to be valuable in the world or to be strong or to be needed or to be capable. And whatever that is, there's 9 of those, or 9 sets of those. How is that driving your behavior? And then when you're maybe not at your best, right? When you are like doubting yourself or saying your opinion doesn't matter and not saying the thing in a meeting, that same motivation, I want to create harmony. I don't want conflict. Want everyone to feel good. That same motivation is at work, right? And so what we can do with the Enneagram is understand those deeper rooted motivations. And when we can name something, we can notice a pattern so much better. And then we get to build some presence around that thing and figure out, okay, where do I want to use that thing? Where am I using that thing? And I don't mean to use that thing, but my system's like, this is what you've been doing all along. Like, keep doing it. You're doing great. So at the end of the day, we kind of put ourselves into one of these 9 general motivations and recognize how our behaviors tie back to that. So we get to then use that as a starting point for our own growth. One of the things I have to say, because this is like a big important part of how I think about the Enneagram, is that most people will take a test online and they'll say, okay, this is what my score is. I'm a type 4, and kind of take that as the be all end all. And that's not that's not the recommended way to find your Enneagram type. It's really about self-reflection and self-identifying with the core motivation, not letting a test tell you what your type is based on your behaviors, because there are limitations to what a test can test for, what you're even conscious of, and the basis of all of the writing and the books and the websites and all of those things are coming generally from one identity of upper class white male straight people who had book deals when these things got published. And so it's important not to take the types like take them totally at their word, right? It's about what is your experience within this framework.
Oh, I love that. So it goes beyond the memes, is what you're saying.
The memes are so fun though, and like
sometimes they're so spot on.
They really are. They really are, right? And that's why people have a hard time identifying their type, is because we get them into this like, every type 9 loves to read a book and curl up on the couch, right? And it's like, okay, a lot of them probably do, but so I'm all for having fun with it, but it's also like in the typing process, what's really going on with you, and like how can you explore deeper for yourself and not listen to what anyone else tells you. Even when I do typing sessions with people, I really am like, okay, these are the ones that it possibly could be. Like, I need you to go away and do some stuff, or start with the test, right? Narrow it down and then kind of go from there. So,
right. Personally, when I did a lot of Enneagram work and reading, I did start with the test, and then I did a lot of reading, and I felt like it, and I like all the personality tests. I am one of those. I take them all. I'm interested in them all. I find it helpful. One of the things you said about, having the name for something, I think then helps you, like being able to notice and name something and have a taxonomy around it is just helpful to be able to almost hold it at arm's length and say, that's the thing. But Enneagram for me was the first time I felt like, as I was reading in particular some of the longer books about it and getting into the wings and things like that, I felt like I really was seen in the writing. As I was reading the writing around it, I was like, oh my goodness. And it was these light bulb moments. So for me, that was helpful, in particular around, so I am an Enneagram 3, and the word self-preservation, that comes in some of the work around it was really, really helpful for me to understand why sometimes, for example, it can be hard for me to turn off. Like, even with my best friends, part of this is also being an ambivert on that spectrum of introvert, extrovert. But, thinking about my energy, and I could have such a wonderful time with a group of friends, but then be drained afterwards. And I felt needing to be on, even in that close group, gave me an awareness of not trying to change myself necessarily in that, but being able to articulate it better and recognize. And a lot of that work, plus 4 years of therapy, I think has allowed me to be a better friend, a better listener to my clients, a better awareness to kind of be where my feet are, and really connect and let down some of that being onness. I don't know if any of that made sense, but that's a little bit what I learned.
Yeah, 100%. And I, for a long time, thought I was an introvert because I needed a lot of alone time. And it was for that exact reason. And I am also an Enneagram 3. So we share that experience in the sense of like, turning on this, it could be called a persona, but it's like I can say the thing I need to say, I can relate to people, I can find the common ground, I can like shift little things about who I am, and to relate to people, to be part of a group. That is like so intrinsic to a type 3, and you don't recognize, right? We talk about Zoom fatigue, right? Like it's like you're doing this thing all the time, it's running in the background. And then you get home and it's like, oh my God, I could just be messy. I could be on the couch. I can like, nobody's going to see me. No one's going to judge me. Not that they were going to judge you anyway, right? But we have that in our head. And so I was like, oh yeah, I need a lot of alone time because I'm turning this thing on and it's draining me. And so now I still do that in places where I want to do that, but also I know myself well enough to know if there are if I've had a long week and I'm going to be in a group with people that I don't know really well, I might just opt out of that because I know that inherently I might like kind of feel the need to be a certain way. And so I just say no that night, or whatever it is. So it's like, there's also ways to kind of work with it and say, of course, if I'm on a podcast or if I'm on a stage or I'm leading a workshop, like I'm turning that thing on. Not that it's not me, right? But it's like maybe like an amped up version of
right. So. Like all systems go. I like what you said about the systems. Yeah. That's making me think about myself as like there's a little bit of an operating system here, and like which one is on. And
yes,
I think that, to your point, that choosing of it and knowing, I hadn't really thought about just the opting out. I thought you were going to tell me, okay, I've figured out how to turn it kind of on and off in those situations. But also an option is just to opt out because you know yourself and you know what you need. So thank you for that freedom and permission.
Yeah. And there are those people who you can let that guard down around. You can kind of like not feel like you have to curate anything about yourself. And those are the people that give you energy and that do spark you, right? And so we get to just kind of like, make those choices for ourselves.
I love it. Okay, I'm going to ask one more Enneagram question because when I was doing some of the self-work around this, I listened to an artist. I should have looked up his name, but you know the artist that made all the Enneagram songs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the line that made me break down crying when I heard it, that was so spot on for me, in particular at that time. This has improved a lot since then. But he had this line in the Enneagram 3 song that said, where work and rest are equally revered. And I was like, oh, and so it's very hard for, well, maybe this is stereotyping, but Enneagram 3s really like to work or like to achieve, like to do. And there is some connection there to childhood wounds and things where we think, I kind of got to, I am loved for what I do and not who I am. That's one of the core wounds that's connected to that. So I've done a lot of work to undo that. And yet rest continued in some ways to be really challenging for me. And a friend recently, we were talking about this over Instagram DMs back and forth. And she was like, you know what? I've just come to terms with the fact that like my rest looks different because she's also wired go, go, go. And it doesn't have to be sitting on the couch by the fire, although I like to do that sometimes. It could be something that's still active or painting or doing something that you are still kind of producing something, but it feels restful for you because it's different. And so recently, I feel like in the last couple of months, even this is a new understanding for me because I was trying to arrive at a place of other people's definition of rest. How silly is that? And now I feel a little bit more
That's
freedom.
Very type 3 of you.
I'm like, I want to do rest right, Sandhya.
Yeah.
Like,
how does everyone else define it? Let me do it that way.
I want to do that. I'm supposed to go on a vacation and I'm supposed to really enjoy a deep, restful vacation. But sometimes traveling is not restful for me. It's fun, but I don't come back restored necessarily. Okay, so that was. Thank you for my therapy session. That
no, I love that. I love that. And interestingly, actually, the person that connected you and I, Kara Kirby, just was telling me to listen to. It's Sleeping at Last is the band that does the Enneagram songs, and I had heard of them a long, long time ago, but I just never had gotten into them because I don't know. I might have had some preconceived notions about something or other, and. She made me listen to them again, actually, just last week. And she told me that, and hopefully this is true, I need to go do my research, but she's like, I think they actually, like, in each of those songs had, like, in the type 3 song, had all musicians that were type 3s, and like, talk to type 3s, and, like, so and that's pretty cool.
My understanding is that's true because I went pretty deep into it as well and listened to all of them and some of the background of that. We'll link to that in the episode description and people can decide for themselves. One of the kind of sentence stems that people have found really helpful in this podcast is I'll ask, if only people knew when it comes to this topic of human potential, or if you want to get into Enneagram or whichever part, sometimes people overcomplicate things. And one of the things I want to do on this podcast is take, just the amazing expertise that's in different individuals of the things that they've learned. So you can go whatever direction you want here, but what would you want to say to people, if only people knew when it comes to, any of what we've been talking about?
Yeah. And this goes back to what you had asked before that I didn't really answer, is like all the different ways you can use Enneagram as a framework. It's like, if only people knew that not everybody operated the same way that they did. It is a natural human thing to assume I learn this way, other people learn this way, I speak this way. If I'm saying something and you're not understanding it, it's because you're disagreeing with me, not because the way I'm saying it isn't clear to you in the way that you think or receive communication, or, I have to follow these norms because that's the way my boss does things, or my boss likes to be recognized with an award, so he gives us all awards, but that's not what I want. Like, it's all of those things, right? And so I think a lot of frameworks can help you do this type of thing, but one of the reasons I love Enneagram so much is that it is so layered, and there's actually, beyond the memes, right, and even like the books, there's so many layers, and there's a lot of nuances, and there's a lot of common ground behind types in like your social style or your conflict and coping mechanisms, or in the childhood wounding and all the things, right? And so there's actually like a bunch of different ways that you can bring this framework to life and have different discussions around it. Even things like what is your natural social style and the way you relate to people, and recognizing that, like, oh, that person isn't isn't rejecting me. They're actually just kind of withdrawing because that's what makes them feel safe. And so how do we find that common ground to like come together? And So it's really about recognizing that we don't all operate the same, which I think people cognitively understand. But when it comes to the day-to-day tactics of the work that we're doing in relationship with other people,
Mm.
in collaboration with other people, we forget. And I think this is where we can name the things, bring them to the table, build awareness around it, and then even things like for a leader, if they're a type 8 and they're really direct,
Mhm.
recognizing that there are people on your team that need more context from you to feel secure. And just because you don't need it, that doesn't mean that they don't need it. And they can
Mm.
actually do so much more if you would just explain things more, or tell them the things that you don't think that they need to know, but they will feel more secure
Mm.
by having that, information. So all those little examples come back to, if we recognize that we don't that everyone else doesn't operate the same way that we do, we can actually then like move that into the tactical and the tangible, and
Mm.
like, okay, what do we do about this?
Sandhya, so let's move to the tactical and let's go to organizational and teams. Okay, so now I'm a leader and I recognize, wow, we aren't all the same. Maybe we've done some of the work around personality types, maybe Enneagram, maybe other things, and we have this
Yeah.
awareness. But now I, as the leader, am overwhelmed because everybody is different. And now I don't know how to be to help them, because do I have to interact in different ways for 80 people on the team that I lead? Like, how do you help make it into the tactical with systems and structure?
Yeah. Great segue there, because it's like that is where we lean on systems, because you can't have it all in your head. And so one of the things that I do, and again, you can do this a lot of different ways, but it's like taking a team and mapping out the team and figuring out like, okay, where are people great? You've got these people that are the type 6s, and so how do you bring them in on projects where you need to mitigate risks or scenario plan? You've got a whole big white space here where you don't have any heart types, as an example. So how do we actually build a process, a team ritual, a system, a standard agenda for one-on-ones where everybody takes the first 5 minutes to like connect at a heart level, and like, because y'all might forget to do that if someone doesn't remind you, right? Or if it's not on a list. And so that's where it becomes tactical, and like, what is the system we're building? And it doesn't have to be a big complex thing. It can be like, these are the 3 bullet points we hit in every one-on-one. Or whenever we're kicking off a project, we're actually going to bring these 2 people in to lead us through an exercise to like get all the risks written out on a whiteboard. Or when we feel stuck, we're going to like go over, to our multifunctional partner who's a 7, and see if they can come in and help us do a brainstorm or see more possibilities. Like, we I think, the thing is, you don't necessarily have to be an expert
Mhm.
on the framework or every nuance of every person, but I also do think in the process of doing this type of work, you learn a lot more about the people that you're with, and then you don't have to like, you naturally integrate it
Mhm.
into,
Mhm.
into the team environment, versus being like, I have a checklist for every single person on my team, and like how they like to be managed and recognized, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think that's so, I mean, it's so practical and actionable to say, yeah, yes, there is some work to be done. And yes, you don't get off the hook for, not knowing, deeper into who your people are. If you are a leader, you have chosen to be in that role or put into that role, and you got to figure out how to do that leading well. And I think another thing I've seen as I've learned more, and for the people that I'm working with where I do know even specifically the Enneagram piece of things, I also am able to, when I'm interacting with them and there's something that maybe at first didn't feel maybe even good to me, I can step back and recognize exactly what you're saying. Like, ooh, wow, that was really direct. But for them, it was kind by being direct. And so it was not, in a place of not caring. It was actually out of care that they came across that way, because I know they're an 8, or, and so I think that there is this awareness, and that takes me really back to potential, because I think I see so much kind of inefficiency. Maybe this is a little bit of my 3-ness where I'm like, let's be more efficient here. But where, okay, I'll give an example. the dot, dot, dot on text or dot, dot, dot on Slack, or even when you're starting to write an email and you delete, 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 start to write an email, delete, delete. There's so much time to me that's wasted in that, of overthinking all of the communication and whatnot, because maybe there is something underneath that needs to be addressed if we think we're going to be perceived in the wrong way, or there is some sort of communication snafu going on. And I find in places where we have done this work, and it's interesting because now I have different clients in different places. So I'm a part of many different teams, and sometimes they run in different ways. But I try to bring into my relationship with the clients from the beginning as clear and as kind as I can be to start with, to just, if there's any of that feeling of, ooh, I find myself delete, 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 I'll pick up the phone and be like, let's just make sure this is clear instead of rewriting an email 6 times. I don't know if anybody else does this. It's only me. But
definitely only you.
It's only me out there. But I think what I'm getting at here is, like, I think this is part of the potential that I see. If what's at stake here is, if we're not willing to do some of this work and put it into systems, to your point, and put it into the agenda, then we're going to go into meetings where the threes will just start running and say, let's go. And then somebody will pause us and say, you meant to insert a greeting here to say, good morning. How was your weekend? Yeah. Or like, how's your dog doing? And so I think that, back to the, again, what's at stake is the potential of the individual and the collective to really thrive. And we spend so much of our life at work. Why would we not want it to be that thriving environment? Have you seen any of that to be true?
It's exactly that. I mean, it's the like rewriting the email 4 times is a leak in your bucket, right? It's like, okay, I have to say it this way. They're going to think this. And at the end of the day, we all have our own lens that we see the world through. And so, that type 8 leader who's going to be like very direct with what they're saying to you, your lens is, what do they think about me? It's like, am I doing good enough? Like,
what did I do wrong?
Right. It's like, oh, I need to be valuable to this person, and this person found something that wasn't valuable to them. So we get to do the work on both sides. To your point, I firmly believe that leadership roles mean responsibility, right? They mean like, you go first, you set the tone, you lift the heavier load in terms of meeting people where they are, and you get to make the choice to invest in equipping your people with the knowledge, with the self-understanding, with the trainings or the tools to develop their own emotional intelligence, to recognize that they have a lens, and to say, oh, okay, every time that person is giving me direct feedback, it's not an indication of my value as a human. It's something that they are doing to help me grow. And that's the other piece of it. And this is so intrinsic in the work that you do too, is like, when we build a foundation of trust, we have a lot more resilience with people. Like, if I know that you have my back, you can say something to me in a very different way than somebody who I've never met before. I'm going to take it differently. I'm going to understand. I'm going to take it in. I'm going to give you a little more leeway and a little more grace on the days that you're not showing up perfectly. And so that's also some of this type of work. Inherently, it's building trust because you're learning about each other in a group setting. And so it's like a dual kind of benefit in that sense of like, you get to understand how each other thinks and feels and acts and processes information, but you also get to do it in a setting where you're together intentionally, you're building trust. And you can do it on Zoom, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be in person, but that intentional time spent together those are the things that build trust on a team. Trust builds resilience and flexibility and range. And then when we can both do the work of like, I have a lens, I'm recognizing it this way, this person is just trying to do this to help me grow, we can kind of just find a lot more flexibility and common ground and space for collaboration, instead of questioning things or rewriting emails or all of those types of things.
Yeah, it's making me think about, I hadn't really recognized, I mean, it was something I guess I learned to do over time, really from being a strategic consultant, but I bring early into the conversations with clients now. I act the way I want to act the whole time, if that makes sense. I start from that place of I'm going to be direct in this relationship because I value your time and the capacity that you're investing in me. And so if you want me to play this role, which oftentimes is pulling apart some of their content and putting it together different ways, I will have to say some hard things sometimes that this part's not working. We need to, and sometimes it's something that they've held for a long time as part of their content that maybe used to work. So I think I learned kind of quickly that I brought that from the desire for the ultimate impact and the desire to help and support them, but it has to be rooted, to your point, in that trust. And then it is so much more efficient and fun because we're not thinking, I don't think at this point they're thinking Tracy's coming in and bashing my stuff, but it's like I brought her in to make this better and to breathe kind of new life into it. And the way to do that, it will not be to just ship out the same thing we had.
Yeah. We can never like take all of our humanness and put it in a box in the closet. Like and like go on about work and then go back and get it out of the closet, put it back on before we go home. Like that doesn't work that way. Type 3s are actually probably really good at it if it were a thing.
Yeah. I'm like, that sounds really nice. Can I do that? That sounds easier. No.
But our humanness follows us around everywhere, right? And so how do we work with it instead of against it?
Yeah. Okay, Sandhya, I would love to transition into some of the resources and books and things like that, but I'd love to start with, will you tell us a little bit more about your business? What kind of clients you serve? Are you taking clients right now? Any of that?
Yeah. So, yes, there's a couple different buckets of the things that I do. Primarily, I work with teams. And so think about teams of like 15 or less. This can be a leadership team. It can be, take a leader and their immediate team. And we go and do this deep work using the Enneagram. And so it's a hybrid of one-on-one and working together as a team. And depending on your goals, we could do, one-on-ones with each person and one session together or multiple sessions together, or have an evolution. And like some of my clients will just kind of like, I'll pop in when they need me on things and we'll kind of, get the ball rolling and then I'll kind of disappear and come back in. So think about it as team coaching and leadership advisory work.
Okay.
I do some one-on-one coaching with people. It's not a big part of my business. I'll take a couple clients on at a time just to really do kind of like deeper one-on-one work. And then I do speaking and larger group workshops all around authenticity at work, and have my own podcast called Working Your Way. Yay. And so it's all about, how do we shed all the things that we think we need to be, or the messages that we heard, and learn the things that we that aren't serving us anymore, and start to kind of do things our way. So.
Oh my goodness, I love it. I started listening when Kara connected us. It's a wonderful podcast. I love it. You. So I'm already going deep in that and have it on my downloads list now. So I'm excited to continue to follow along in that as you have guests on and explore these topics. Okay, any based on what we talked about, any book recommendations for folks?
Yeah, so many.
I know.
You can see behind me, I'm like
we're threes. We like the books.
I'm a professional book collector and referencer and reader and all the things. One that I've appreciated a lot lately is a book called Difficult Conversations, because it's not just kind of your standard like communication book, but it actually does go into like, why can't I say this thing? Like, okay, if I change the way I communicate, is it like pulling on a thread of like identity or safety or, those types of things? And so I like the approach to it. There's a bunch of different Enneagram books. I think cpenneagram.com is a website that has a test. It's more expensive than the free ones out there. I think it's like $40, but it's, I think, the best online test. And or you can buy a $12 book. The Essential Enneagram is great. Discovering Your Personality Type, I think, is the other one. Those are like the smaller kind of good like starter books. And then I've got a resource that I can send to that's kind of just like more of a self-reflection guide. So I can share that link with all of you. Yes. And my website is selfatwork.com. I didn't mention that before. So yeah, a couple of Enneagram books, Difficult Conversations. And this is probably more for women of color. There's a book called The First, the Few, the Only by a woman named Deepa Purushothaman. And it's a great book for folks with marginalized identities to recognize, like, where is it you and where is it the system, and just kind of like normalize, like, you're not the problem. Like, here's all the ways that comes to life. So those are a couple that are top of mind right now.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. Anything else? Any other podcasts or any other resources that you would like to share?
I listen to so many podcasts. And there's one episode about, I think it's called Leading Authentically. It's in the HBR Women at Work podcast. That is one of my favorite episodes also. So I think that's another good one to listen to.
Oh, I love that. Okay. And where can folks find you? I'll put your website. Where else do you like to hang out?
Yeah, my website. I'm on LinkedIn. You can just find me by my name, and on Instagram at self@worksandthea. That's it. And yeah, those are really the places. And then, email and all the normal things.
Wonderful. Sandhya, thank you so much for your time, for this conversation. I'm so excited to know you and to be connected now. Thank you, Kara Kirby, for connecting us. And I look forward to just staying connected online and hearing the amazing things that you're doing. Thanks so much for listening to the Building Thinkers podcast. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. And if you enjoyed what you heard, please leave a podcast rating and review. That helps more listeners find us in the world of podcasting algorithms. You can find out more about my learning and development strategy services at buildingthinkers.com. And remember, there's no limit to what you can learn.